In the small town of Brackenville, the stillness of the streets and the silence of the nights are disturbed by an ancient legend that has haunted residents for decades. Brackenville, with its Victorian houses and cobblestone streets, looks like an ordinary place, but it carries a dark secret that few dare mention. In the 1980s, a traveling circus arrived in the city, bringing with it laughter, colors and, most importantly, a clown named Jasper. Jasper was a children's favorite, known for his funny jokes and magic tricks. However, a tragedy changed everything. During a show, an unexpected explosion on stage caused a devastating fire. The circus was consumed by flames, and many artists lost their lives. Jasper survived, but was horribly deformed. His once cheerful face has become a grotesque mask of scars and disfigurement. The tragedy transformed Jasper, who disappeared without a trace after recovering. Since then, stories have begun to emerge of a deformed clown lurking around the former circus, now abandoned. Villagers spoke in whispers about sightings of Jasper in the forests surrounding the circus. Mysterious disappearances began to occur, especially among those who dared to venture near the circus ruins. The legend of Jasper has become a cautionary tale for children, a warning never to go near the forbidden area. But, like all good urban legends, it also aroused the curiosity of the most adventurous. It was Halloween Eve when a group of friends decided it was time to test the veracity of these stories. Lucas, Sarah, Mike, and Emily were lifelong friends, united by the desire to unravel mysteries and the need for one last adventure before parting ways for college. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a healthy dose of courage and skepticism, they hatched a plan to explore the abandoned circus and debunk the legend of the deformed killer clown. As they walked through the dark forest towards the circus, the tension between them increased. The tall, gnarled trees cast haunting shadows in the lantern light, and the sounds of the night forest seemed amplified, as if nature itself was warning them to return. But the curiosity and determination to prove that everything was just a made-up story were stronger. When they arrived at the circus, the sight that presented itself was one of pure desolation. Torn tents swayed in the wind, rusty metal structures creaked in protest, and the silence was almost palpable. Lucas, leading the group, signaled them to spread out and begin the investigation. Each of them carried a mixture of excitement and fear, unaware that they were about to experience the most terrifying night of their lives. In the surroundings, they found signs that someone might be living there: remains of fires, crushed food cans, and a strange smell of burning meat. Mike, always the most skeptical, laughed nervously, suggesting that perhaps it was just vagrants using the place as a shelter. But Sarah, more sensitive to her surroundings, felt a shiver run down her spine. Something wasn't right, and she knew it. As they explored, they began to hear distant noises, soft footsteps, muffled laughter, and the sound of something heavy being dragged. The group gathered quickly, their faces illuminated only by the flickering glow of flashlights. Fear began to creep in, and what was once an exciting adventure began to feel like a nightmare waiting to happen. They decided to follow the sound, hoping to find a logical explanation, but each step took them deeper into the darkness and terror that surrounded the abandoned circus. The night was just beginning, and the true horror was yet to come. What they would discover in the depths of the abandoned circus would change their lives forever. The deformed clown, Jasper, wasn't just a legend, he was real, and he was waiting for them. The friends were increasingly restless as they advanced through the ruins of the circus. The memories of their childhoods, where legends about the clown Jasper were told to scare them, now gained a new dimension of reality. Lucas, always the bravest of the group, led the way, his flashlight cutting through the darkness like a knife. The atmosphere of tension was palpable, and the silence was broken only by the sound of their footsteps on the ground covered in leaves and debris. As they approached the heart of the circus, they found the large main tent, now just a shadow of its former glory. The vibrant colors had faded, and the fabric was torn and covered in moss. Inside the tent, the scene was even more sinister. The wooden bleachers were rotten and broken, and the center arena was empty except for an old wheelchair that looked out of place. The silence was profound, and the group hesitated at the entrance, their flashlights casting grotesque shadows on the tent walls. Suddenly, a metallic sound echoed through the tent, making them jump in fright. It was Mike, who had accidentally kicked an old paint can. He laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension, but his friends didn't laugh. They were starting to feel like something was watching them, something that didn't want them to be there. Sarah, with her heightened sixth sense, was the first to notice a presence. She whispered to the others, warning them that they were not alone. They continued their exploration, now more cautious. Every dark corner seemed to hide something, every sound was a cause for alarm. They passed the old lion cage, now empty and covered in cobwebs, and came to a small trailer, which looked like it had been used recently. Inside, they found evidence that someone was living there: torn clothes, a dirty mattress, and food remains. The smell of burning flesh was stronger, and a shiver ran down Emily's spine when she found an old photograph of Jasper before the accident, smiling friendly, a disturbing contrast to the image they had of him now. Lucas suggested they leave the trailer and continue the search. They knew they were close to something big, something that could finally reveal the truth behind the killer clown legend. They left the trailer and headed to an area surrounded by tall trees, where the shadows seemed to take on a life of their own. The sound of muffled laughter returned, closer this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The group met once again, trying to decide what to do. Suddenly, a scream cut through the air. It was Mike, who had moved a little away from the group. They rushed towards him, only to find him lying on the ground, with a deep cut on his arm. Mike was pale and shaking, unable to explain what had happened. Lucas helped him get up, and they decided it was time to get out of there. But the way back seemed longer and more tortuous. Each step was accompanied by the feeling of being watched, pursued. They came to a clearing where the old circus carousel was partially dismantled, its broken lights still hanging like ghosts from the past. The sound of laughter was now clearer and closer. Lucas ordered them to run, but as they moved, a heavy iron gate fell, blocking the exit. Panic set in. The flashlights began to fail, leaving them in almost total darkness. It was then that they saw, in the intermittent light of the lanterns, the figure of the clown Jasper. Jasper, deformed and terrible, approached slowly, his disfigured face covered in a mask of fury and pain. The friends turned around, trying to find another way out, but they were surrounded. Jasper cornered them against the carousel, his sinister laughter echoing across the clearing. With no way out, the group knew they would face their fate there, in the heart of the abandoned circus. Jasper's sinister laughter echoed through the clearing, a sound that penetrated his friends' bones. Lucas, Sarah, Mike, and Emily were huddled against the carousel, their flashlights flickering in the darkness. The deformed clown advanced slowly, savoring the terror in his eyes. Time seemed to drag by, each second filled with growing dread. Sarah, with tears in her eyes, grabbed Lucas' hand, while Mike pressed on the cut on his arm, trying to stop the bleeding. Lucas knew they needed to act quickly. Looking around, he saw a small opening in the trees, a possible escape route. With an urgent whisper, he showed the others the way. They prepared to run, knowing this might be their only chance. In a coordinated movement, the four launched themselves towards the opening, their legs moving with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. Jasper, surprised by the sudden attack, tried to grab Sarah, but she barely managed to free herself. The group ran through the forest, branches scratching their faces and hands, hearts beating like drums in their chests. The sound of Jasper's heavy footsteps followed them, a constant reminder that the threat was far from overcome. Running without stopping, the friends arrived at an old wooden hut, half hidden by the vegetation. Lucas forced the door, which gave way with a loud creak. They entered and quickly pushed a heavy bookcase against the entrance, trying to create a makeshift barrier. Everyone's breathing was labored, and the silence inside the cabin was almost oppressive. Mike, now pale and weak from blood loss, sat on the floor, trying to catch his breath. While Lucas and Sarah looked for a way to strengthen the barricade, Emily found a box of candles and matches. By lighting some, they managed to illuminate the cabin's interior, revealing its abandoned state. Antique, dust-covered furniture, an old wood stove, and a locked trunk were the only items of interest. The atmosphere was heavy and suspenseful, as if the cabin itself was permeated with terror. The sound of Jasper's footsteps outside increased, indicating that he was close. The group knew that the barricade would not hold them for long. Desperate, they began to look for an alternative way out. It was then that Sarah found a trapdoor hidden under a dirty rug. With effort, they managed to open the heavy door, revealing a dark tunnel that seemed to lead outside the cabin. Without thinking twice, they started going down the tunnel, one at a time. Lucas was last, helping Mike down carefully. The tunnel was cramped and damp, with walls of earth and wood that creaked under his weight. The darkness was almost total, except for the dim light of the candles Emily carried. The sound of Jasper trying to break down the cabin door was a constant reminder of the impending danger. Crawling through the tunnel, the group could hear the distant echo of Jasper's efforts to break into the cabin. Each noise sent a shiver down their spines, propelling them forward. Finally, they emerged in a small clearing, surrounded by dense forest. The moonlight provided just enough illumination to see their surroundings. Breathing heavily, they paused to reassess their situation. Lucas, ever the leader, tried to remain calm and formulate a plan. "We have to keep moving," he said, looking each of his friends in the eye. "We can't let him find us again." With renewed determination, they began moving through the forest, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the abandoned circus. But the feeling of being hunted did not disappear. The forest, with its shadows and unsettling sounds, seemed to conspire against them. Every broken branch and rustling leaf added to the feeling that Jasper was always one step behind. The night was far from over, and the real terror was yet to come. The friends continued to walk through the forest, their steps quick and desperate, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Lucas led the group, his jaw clenched in determination. He knew they couldn't stop, not while Jasper's danger was so close. Time seemed to drag by, every second filled with the terror of being captured. Emily, still holding the candle, noticed that the flame was beginning to waver. The forest wind and humidity threatened to extinguish it at any moment. "We need to find shelter again," she whispered, looking around for some sign of safety. Sarah, already exhausted, nodded, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. Suddenly, Lucas saw a structure in the distance. It was an old abandoned church, its stone walls covered in vines and moss. It felt like a safe haven, at least for now. They ran toward the church, their hopes renewed. When they arrived, they pushed open the heavy wooden doors, which creaked in protest but gave way, allowing them entry. Inside the church, the air was thick and cold, but it offered a sense of security. The benches were covered in dust, and the stained glass windows were dirty and cracked, letting in only the faint light of the moon. Lucas and Emily quickly locked the doors from the inside, while Sarah and Mike looked for something to use as a barricade. They found old rusty boards and nails, and worked together to reinforce the entrance. With the church safe, at least temporarily, the group sat down to catch their breath. Lucas looked at the group, their faces tired and dirty but alive. "We need to think of a plan," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't just keep running forever." As they discussed their options, they heard a sound that made them freeze. There was a light shuffling of feet coming from the back of the church. Everyone turned around at once, their hearts racing. The dim candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Someone's here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. Lucas, holding a piece of wood as a weapon, began moving towards the sound. The others followed, their footsteps silent on the stone floor. They arrived at a door that led to the church basement. The door was ajar, and an icy cold emanated from inside. Lucas carefully pushed the door open, revealing a staircase that led down into the darkness. Going downstairs, they found a damp, dark basement, with old boxes and broken furniture scattered across the floor. In the far corner, they saw a figure. Shrunken. She was a woman, covered in dirt and her eyes wide with fear. "Who are you?" Emily asked, trying not to startle her. The woman slowly raised her head, revealing a face full of scars and pain. "I'm Marie," she said weakly. I ran away from Jasper years ago. He captured me, but I managed to escape and hid here." The revelation was shocking. Someone had survived the killer clown, but at what cost? Marie told her story, every detail adding to the horror. Jasper wasn't just a legend, he was a real monster, a product of tragedy and madness. She explained that he hunted anyone who came near the old circus, turning fear into a macabre game. "You guys need to get out of here," she pleaded. "He'll find you, just like he found everyone else." The urgency in Marie's voice made her friends realize the seriousness of her situation. But before they could decide their next move, a terrifying sound echoed through the church, Jasper's sinister laughter. He was there, closer than ever. Absolute terror gripped them as they searched for a way to escape, knowing that their fight for survival was far from over. Jasper's sinister laughter echoed through the church, reverberating off the stone walls and plunging his friends into absolute terror. Lucas, Sarah, Mike, Emily and Marie knew time was running out. The deformed clown's presence meant that the church's illusory security was about to be destroyed. The group quickly gathered, trying to formulate an escape plan before Jasper found them. Lucas looked around, looking for any sign of exit. "We need to get out of here now," he said, the urgency in his voice clear. "Marie, do you know any other way?" Marie, still shaking, pointed to a small window at the back of the basement. "That window leads to the cemetery behind the church. It's the only way out I know." Without wasting time, Lucas began to pry open the window. It was small and covered in rust, but with a combined effort, they managed to open it. One by one, they began to crawl out, the sound of Jasper's laughter getting louder by the second. Sarah was the first to leave, followed by Emily and Mike. Marie hesitated for a moment, but Lucas. He encouraged her, helping her through the window. He was the last to leave, pushing himself out as Jasper descended the basement stairs. Outside, the cemetery was shrouded in thick fog, the ancient tombs creating ominous shadows. The group ran between the headstones, their feet moving quickly over the wet grass. The sound of heavy footsteps behind them indicated that Jasper was in pursuit. The night was cold, and the air was filled with a palpable sense of despair. Lucas led the group towards a dense forest on the edge of the cemetery. "Come on, we need to hide in the forest," he shouted, his heart beating wildly. They ran into the darkness, hoping the trees would offer some protection against their pursuer. Time was running out, and they knew they needed to find a safe place to regroup and think of a new strategy. Inside the forest, the darkness was almost total. They continued to run, their flashlights barely illuminating the path ahead. The sound of Jasper following them was a constant reminder of the impending danger. "There, a cave," shouted Emily, pointing to an opening in the side of a nearby hill. They ran into the cave, entering and hiding in the deep shadows. Inside the cave, the atmosphere was cold and damp, but it provided temporary shelter. They sat down, trying to catch their breath and process the situation. Mike, still injured, was getting weaker and weaker. Sarah tore off a piece of her shirt and made a makeshift tourniquet to stop the bleeding. "We need to get out of here," Lucas said, his voice low but firm. "We can't keep running. We need to find a way to stop Jasper." Marie, still shaking, spoke about Jasper's only weakness that she knew. "He's attracted to fear," she explained. "But he's also vulnerable to fire. It was the fire that disfigured him, and he never got over it. If we can set a trap, we might have a chance." The idea of facing Jasper directly was terrifying, but they knew they had no other choice. Survival depended on facing your fears and fighting. As they formulated their plan, the sounds of footsteps and laughter in the distance indicated that Jasper was close but had not yet found the cave. Lucas and others. They began to collect materials they could use, dry twigs, pieces of cloth and anything flammable they could find. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. With time running out, they set the trap at the cave entrance. When everything was ready, Lucas signaled the others to retreat. The tension was palpable, and the fear was on edge. They waited in silence, hearts beating like drums, each second dragging by as they waited for the final confrontation with the deformed clown. Finally, the sound of Jasper's footsteps grew closer. He was at the entrance to the cave, and the sight of him made the terror increase. Lucas, with shaking hands, lit the makeshift torch and threw it at the trap. Fire broke out, the flames growing rapidly. Jasper screamed in fury and pain, the sight of the fire awakening memories of his transformation. The clown tried to advance, but the fire stopped him, the flames licking his deformed body. The friends, watching from a safe distance, knew this was the decisive moment. Jasper was weakened but still dangerous. They needed to act quickly to ensure their survival. The final confrontation was about to begin, and everyone's fate would be decided there, in the darkness of the flame-lit cave. Jasper was surrounded by fire, his grotesque laughter turned into screams of pain and fury. Flames danced around him, reflecting off the damp walls of the cave, as his friends watched with a mixture of terror and hope. Marie's plan was working, but they knew they weren't safe yet. The deformed clown was a force of nature, fueled by a hatred that seemed inextinguishable. Lucas, with adrenaline coursing through his veins, grabbed a burning branch and approached cautiously. "We have to keep him on the fire," he said, his voice firm but tinged with fear. Sarah and Emily followed his example, picking up pieces of burning wood and moving forward. Mike, despite his weakness, found the strength to stand up and join them, determined to end the terror that Jasper represented. The clown, feeling cornered, cast a hateful look at the group before throwing himself forward, trying to break the circle of fire. Lucas and the others retreated, keeping the barricade of flames between them and the creature. Jasper roared, his disfigured face contorting in agony, but every attempt to advance was repelled by the heat and flames. The cave, lit by fire, looked like a nightmare scenario. The shadows cast by the flames created distorted shapes on the walls, as if the spirits of the place themselves were manifesting themselves. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and the tension was palpable. The friends knew they couldn't maintain the barricade forever. They needed to find a way to put an end to Jasper once and for all. It was then that Marie had an idea. "We have to tear down the roof of the cave," she said, pointing to the cracks in the rocks above them. "If we can make the roof collapse, we can bury Jasper here, where he can't follow us." The idea was risky, but it was the best chance they had. Lucas nodded, and they began looking for weak spots in the cave walls and ceiling. Using pieces of wood and rocks, they began hitting the cracked areas, trying to cause a chain reaction. Jasper, realizing what they were doing, tried to advance again, but was repelled by the flames that were still burning. Their angry screams echoed through the cave, mixing with the sound of their friends hitting the rocks. Finally, a series of loud pops announced that the plan was working. Stones began to fall from the ceiling, first small, then larger. The entire cave was shaking, and the friends knew they needed to get out quickly. "Come on, we have to get out of here," shouted Lucas, pulling Sarah and Emily towards the exit. Mike and Marie followed, rushing to escape before total collapse occurred. As they ran, the ceiling of the cave began to collapse, rocks falling in a cascade of destruction. Jasper, trapped in the center of the collapse, screamed in helpless fury as the rocks buried him. The cave entrance was closing quickly, and the friends barely managed to escape in time, falling to the ground outside as the opening was sealed by rubble. Lying on the wet grass, breathing hard, they heard the final sound of falling rocks and the silence that followed. They were alive, and Jasper's terror seemed to finally be over. The relief was palpable, but mixed with a sense of loss and pain. They had faced unspeakable horror and survived, but they knew that the scars of that encounter would stay with them forever. Lucas, still panting, looked at his friends. "We did it," he said, his voice full of emotion. "We survive." Sarah, Emily, Mike and Marie nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Jasper's nightmare was buried, but the memories of that night would remain. As dawn approached, the group began walking back through the forest, each step lighter, knowing they had conquered an ancient evil. The deformed clown and his thirst for revenge were finally buried, and life, despite everything, could go on. The first light of morning began to break the horizon, bathing the forest in a soft, golden light. Lucas, Sarah, Emily, Mike and Marie continued to walk, their bodies exhausted, but their spirits lifted by the victory over Jasper. The fog slowly dissipated, revealing the path ahead, while the sounds of nature awakened around them, bringing a sense of normalcy. As they walked, Marie told more about her story and how she had survived so long in hiding. Her clarity of detail painted an even more terrifying picture of what they already knew about Jasper. The deformed clown was not just a killer, but a living manifestation of pure evil. He had become a legend that many in the region feared, but few truly believed. "Now that he is buried, perhaps these lands can finally rest," said Marie, looking at the others. "The nightmare may be over, but we must never forget what happened here." Her voice was full of gravity, reflecting the depth of her experiences. The friends nodded in agreement, understanding that their lives were irrevocably changed. As they continued, they came to a dirt road that seemed to lead back to civilization. It was a path of hope and promise, an escape route from the terror they had faced. However, there was still an unsettling feeling in the air, a feeling that something was about to happen. Lucas led the group, keeping a close eye on his surroundings. Suddenly, a distant noise made everyone stop. It was a familiar sound, but at the same time, surreal, the sound of laughter. They turned towards the noise, their hearts beating faster. The dread they thought they had left behind began to return. The laughter was weak but clear, carrying a sense of inevitability that they could not ignore. "This can't be happening," Emily muttered, her eyes wide with fear. Lucas squeezed her hand, trying to offer some comfort. "We need to keep going. We have to get out of here," he insisted, the determination in his voice barely hiding his own terror. The group began to walk faster, almost running down the dirt road, trying to leave behind the sound that haunted them. As the road stretched ahead, the laughter began to fade, as if the forest itself was swallowing the sound. Calm returned, but the experience left an indelible mark on their spirits. They continued walking, finally spotting a small village in the distance. The wooden houses and the smoke rising from the chimneys offered a welcoming contrast to the nightmare they had left behind. Arriving at the village, they were greeted by curious and worried looks from the residents. They approached an older man who appeared to be an authority figure in the community. Lucas quickly explained what had happened, omitting some of the more horrific details, but making it clear that Jasper's danger was finally neutralized. The man nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "You are heroes," he said sincerely. "No one has ever been able to face Jasper and survive. You have brought peace to these lands." His words brought a feeling of relief and pride to the group, but also a realization of the cost of this victory. The following days were of recovery and reflection. The friends stayed in the village, receiving care and support from the residents. Mike, whose wounds were healing, thanked everyone for staying by his side. "We wouldn't have done it without everyone's courage," he said, emotionally. Sarah, Emily and Lucas agreed, feeling more united than ever. Marie, now free from the constant terror, decided to stay in the village, helping the residents rebuild and remember the sacrifice that had been made. The friends, on the other hand, knew it was time to move on and get back to their lives. When they finally set off, the road ahead seemed brighter, full of possibilities and renewed hope. As they walked, one last thought crossed Lucas's mind. They had faced unspeakable evil and emerged victorious. Jasper's memory would remain, but now it was a reminder of the strength and resilience they all carried within. The terror was buried, but the lesson of courage and unity would remain forever. So they moved forward, ready to face whatever challenge the future held, knowing that they had overcome the worst and were ready for anything. Jasper's laughter, now just a distant memory, no longer had power over them. Life, with all its complexities, went on, and they were ready to live it fully.